the small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians. The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations.
It's been, an amazing experience, I think, for both of us to get to know a lot of Canadians and have like the absolute pleasure of listening to their stories and hearing how their lives were changed.
Exclusive interview with Tamara Lich and Chris Barber. Thank you for being here. And I'm so happy because this place where we are at today, it's where I first met you for an interview. I didn't know who you were at that time. And so today we will a little bit speak about, first of all, where you're at with all the prosecution. You too, Chris, I think you passed through a lot of things recently, and a lot of people are watching you from afar, and they are just questioning what is happening with them.
There's a pretty good chance. Well, I think it's inevitable at this point. But I'll probably be going somewhere tomorrow where I'll be getting 3 square meals a day.
Let's do it. See you later, Chris. Just back up, guys. Thank you.
But I want to know a little bit from you, Chris, because today there were an application to out the proceedings, and I want to have your impression on these 3 days of hearing.
Well, we launched a stay application against the 2 guilty verdicts, which we were found guilty of back in March. So judicial error would be the condition for the motion. And we've spent 2 days, 1 day on the stand for my chief examination, I guess, when it comes to where we were and the mental state we were in during the Freedom Convoy in 2022. And then cross-examination was a full day, as well as submissions today from lawyers to judge. So it's been quite the experience. This is day number 48 or 49 for us to actually be sitting in the room, in a courtroom. And I believe we've been gone from home roughly about 130 days in the last year and a half, unavailable to work, obviously 3,000 kilometers from home. So it's been quite the interesting last couple of years.
I want to know a little bit, you have been found guilty. Can you explain exactly what is the charge?
I was charged with 7 indictable offenses, ranging from mischief to obstruction to intimidation, with 4 counseling orders on top of that. We were acquitted on 4 charges, a stay of prosecution on the mischief counseling, and of course found guilty on mischief and disobeying a court order.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was convicted, like Chris, of mischief. The stay was applied to the counseling mischief, and we were acquitted of the last 4 charges. So, that was pretty good, pretty good. But I've been under bail conditions, obviously, since I was arrested or since I was released on bail. So I've got about 7 conditions, I think. One of them was actually dropped today, which was a surprise. We didn't really see that coming, but that's still a win. I have a sentencing hearing booked for the end of July 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And so that'll take about, 3 days, hopefully. Sometimes in our case, they drag on a little bit more, even as we saw today. We had to carry over again today. So we're scheduled for 3 days at the end of July, and that'll be the hearing itself, and then we'll most likely have to come back and do the actual sentencing sometime after that.
Yesterday, you were cross-examined by the Crown Prosecutor, and I hear you speaking about Justice McLean on what you actually base yourself of in your own perspective that the protest was lawful, and in your understanding too of Justice McLean of what was an emergency for you for honking the horn.
Yes, most people know there was a horn injunction placed on February 5th. It was obviously a Saturday, so we remained in court on the 7th. And on the 7th of February, as well as the 6th, the 7th of February and the 16th of February, Justice McLean ruled on the horn injunction and gave a set of provisions for us in the Freedom Convoy protest. And I had to look it back up at paragraph 7 in the one order and paragraph 9 in the second order. The wording is the same, just different paragraphs, but it says this court orders that provided the terms of the order are complied with, the defendants and other persons remain at liberty to engage in peaceful protest, peaceful, lawful, and safe protest. And so our assumption on that ruling on both those times gave us the permission, as long as you were there to practice your charter rights as a Canadian, that you could remain and peacefully protest.
Today, they were mainly debating about this, but right now we don't know what you will face, but for the people who didn't follow, what the Crown Prosecutor wants.
So the Crown Prosecutor wants 2 years in federal prison for both Tamara, Lich, and myself. And just recently, they've introduced a forfeiture order. They would like to take my Semi, the truck that I've owned for 21 years. I bought Big Red brand new in 2003. My son was 7 months old at the time, the first passenger in the passenger seat. I've spent 3.4 million kilometers driving this truck all over the country, making a living. And the Crown's intention is to a forfeiture order, to take the truck, to seize the truck, and ultimately to destroy the truck because of its resemblance to the Freedom Convoy protests in February 2022. I think it's personal to them now. I think there's people from above in the province or in the federal government who are dictating down. They still want their pound of flesh. As many people know, hundred thousands of people came together in February after 2 years of devastation under government mandates and restrictions, and we thought about this just today. The amount of people that were relying on the Freedom Convoy, Tamara, myself, the stories we heard from Canadians who were just in a horribly desperate, dark place in their life. We looked at the suicide rates, the mental illness, the alcohol, the drug addiction. The one that still gets me the most was the people that weren't able to say goodbye to their loved ones as they took their last breaths in care homes or hospitals. We've heard from these people for the last number of years, but we've also, the stories that we heard on our way to Ottawa during the convoy, I'm not kidding when I say that Tamara and I shed many, many, many tears in the cab of that truck, watching and listening to the people across the country. We had a tremendous amount of weight on our shoulders.
Chris just mentioned that you faced the same thing, 2 years in jail. You already been in jail, so you might have like a reduced sentence. But the question applies to you too, which kind of challenge you are facing every day, because as I just mentioned, your name have been put in the dirt.
Well, again, I have, all these bail conditions that I have to comply with, obviously. And so I'll just read a few. Obviously, keep the peace and be of good behavior. I have to reside at my residence in Alberta. I have no contact orders with a few people still. I'm not to organize or aid or abet in the organizing of any public protest, demonstration, or unlawful assembly. Without limiting the generality of the foregoing, you are not to engage in the organization or promotion of any public protest, demonstration, or unlawful assembly in respect to anything related to the COVID-19 pandemic or Freedom Convoy activities. So basically, my freedom of assembly, I've lost. I'm not allowed to even, for example, even the ostrich situation that's happening in BC. I mean, I would be breaching this condition if I went to support that, you know. I'm not allowed still in the red zone downtown Ottawa unless I'm here for court or here to meet my lawyer. And so in this instance, I got to come because we had one of our team that was sitting in for Chris's, but I still had to be escorted around by her everywhere while was in the red zone. I guess that's it now because, the one that we had dropped was one that had actually pertained to my social media order.
I find it really challenging when I hear just how the media has been used to demonize peaceful Canadian blue-collar workers and people that were just simply had enough of the mandates. And what we wanted was a conversation with our federal government in regards to my specific plight was the federal mandates for cross-border commercial vehicle travel that was implemented on January 15th, 2022. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. We've been dealing with provincial mandates for a few years before that were just over the line, and it seemed like the federal government was dictating where the provinces went with a lot of the mandates. We were talking about interprovincial check stops. That was something that was coming later, but at the same time they were saying, we're going to release the mandates, we're going to give you your freedom back. But it seemed like they were never doing that. And when this group of Canadians stood up and said we'd had enough, the government went so far out of the way to ignore us, to belittle us, to call us names, to use the government-paid media against us, to portray us as horrible human beings. And that's probably been my biggest disappointment from the government.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
My personal bank accounts were frozen for upwards of 3.5 months. My corporate bank accounts were frozen, and as well as my joint bank accounts with my wife. So the corporate side of things, seeing payments be returned for the fuel for the trucks. We run a trucking company. I run a business with my son, and that was definitely a challenge. And then having to go in to get a loan. If most people don't know, there's a $300 million lawsuit right now against Tamara, myself, and other people involved with the Freedom Convoy from citizens of Ottawa, via Paul Champ, and Zexi Lee is his lead plaintiff right now. So for me to go into any banking facility in the country right now and ask for any operating loans or anything to run my business properly, I'm rejected. It's been a challenge the last number of years, as well as having to have the travel expense funds to travel to Ottawa 7 times now. I was adding up the dollars today for my curiosity's sake, and I would say I'm well over $40,000 just in travel expenses alone, just in the last number of years traveling back and forth.
You are here in Ottawa mainly because you wanted to support Chris.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Why, for you, it was really important to be here?
Well, I mean, we're partners, like I said the other day, we started this trial together and we're going to end this trial together. And there was absolutely no way I was going to let him come out here and do this by himself. So, and I mean, myself being in that courtroom many times, I know how important it is to have the supporters there in the courtroom with us too. So, I mean, it means a lot, and we really appreciate, they show up all the time. So I know how important it is to have that type of support there. And like I said, we're partners in this, so all the way.
What made you make the jump to be involved in the Freedom Convoy?
Well, I mean, a lot of the things that Chris was talking about, like the stories that we heard, I was hearing that all through COVID. I was watching it with my own eyes. I was watching families being completely ripped apart. I was hearing the stories of friends that couldn't go see their loved ones. We were just talking the other night about the stories that were coming out of Quebec and the long-term care homes. At that time, there was already vaccine injuries showing up, and they were still advocating for more boosters and more vaccines. And I mean, it was just a really, really dark time. And I just recognized early on what I perceived to be propaganda techniques. All of a sudden it was COVID-19 was on the radio, on the TV, on the sides of buses and bus stops, billboards. It was just, we were inundated with all of this stuff. And, remember we used to get the COVID death numbers every day. And I thought, well, that's weird. Like, why aren't we getting, the brain cancer deaths or, the drunk driving accidents? Like, why are we only getting these numbers? And so for me, a lot of things just didn't add up and didn't make sense. And I just finally had enough and knew that something had to be done. And like I said, it started with a friend of mine sending me Chris's TikTok video, and I just called him up, and I just felt like I had to support as much as I could and use the skill set that I possessed in order to try and stop the tyrannical overreach that I saw happening.
I want to have both of you answering that question, but during the Freedom Convoy, people were there, they were cheering, they were dancing, they were feeding everybody, and it was kind of a big party. But that big party was not your side of the story. Can you a little bit explain like your daily to daily, like how much pressure you had and maybe like how hard it was to try to keep the peace and also make sure that everything was going well?
It was a very crazy time. We often joked that some days, 1 hour felt like a week because so many things were happening in a day. Of course, our roles were definitely a little bit different. I mean, I was on obviously the finance committee with the crowdfunding that we were doing. So in the first little bit, I was obviously in a ton of meetings with GoFundMe and our lawyers working together to try and, solve what was happening with that. And then the give, send, go. So I was tied up a lot in meetings and back and forth. And I didn't get down even to the Hill very often, so you're right. It wasn't a party for us. Absolutely not. I
guess early on in Convoy, I was in direct communication with law enforcement, basically right from the time we left Alberta and Saskatchewan through Manitoba. Any detachments that needed, we would wanted to know what we needed to do to be compliant and have permission to, and safety was the utmost. So OPP met us at the Manitoba-Ontario border and escorted us the entire way across the province of Ontario. And then my role kind of slipped into, during the convoy, working with local Ottawa City police officers and listening to their concerns or even asking for direction for making sure emergency lanes were open, making sure public safety was at the utmost, trying to get some of the trucks out of the downtown core and the residential areas. Most people know I'm just one guy, so I did the best that I could during the time I could to make sure that the emergency lanes were open. There was a couple apartment buildings in the downtown core where ambulances would frequently take people out, elderly people in the building. So those were my priority areas, as well as listening to direction from local law enforcement for cleaning up any concerns that they had or making sure that we were peaceful and lawful protests. So I found myself, I put a lot of miles on. I believe that I lost about 20 pounds just walking the streets of Ottawa, and it was a tremendous. Thinking back on it now, it was the dead of winter. It was cold as can be. I did a lot there. Just in my focus wasn't necessarily enjoying the freedoms of the protest, but making sure that public safety was number one and that people adhered to the rules, and we followed the rules and made sure we did what we could to make sure people were safe.
But in the same time, it's what we were talking about. You came with a group of people, but now they try to make you responsible for the protest, the entire protest, where we had people coming from independent group, we had bad actor coming into the protest. How do you feel that now they really try to make you responsible for thousands of people's actions?
Yes, and that's probably the disheartening part of it all. We didn't tell anyone to park in a residential area. That was never part of our plan. When we came into Ottawa, we were told from people within our circles that we had 2 staging areas that we could be at. Major Hill Park was one and Confederation Park was the other. And so Tamara and I driving across the country, we thought, when we get to Ottawa, we'll pull into a staging area and we'll be fine. And what we were met with was a city that was already had a lot of trucks in it from people that came in the day before that we weren't aware of. And then when you had however many trucks stuck out on the Sir John A. Macdonald Expressway wanting to be part of the action in the downtown core, those guys then eventually melted into the downtown core. And then you had police officers and city officials blocking graders across intersections and salt trucks and payloaders. I felt like that was my responsibility to try and assist the city in trying to rectify that and making it easier for the residents. So it's very disheartening to know that there was some bad actors in play. And then despite how bad they were, we seem to be being held responsible for that. So
I want to know, each of you, your message for Canadians, but also for every single person around the world who were watching the Freedom Convoy, that you gave hope.
I think my message for Canadians would be that, for everyone, freedom isn't free. And we have to fight for our freedoms. We have to remain vigilant, constantly, and to protect those freedoms. And I think, we've just gotten to a point where we need to start focusing on common ground again and finding that common ground and commonalities with each other instead of focusing on our differences and staying unified and strong and caring about each other. I guess that was the biggest thing. Well, my biggest driver, you asked me this earlier, of why I wanted to get involved, is because what I was seeing was we were losing our humanity. And, we have to hang on to that, and we have to take care of each other, and we have to keep fighting for our freedoms because nobody else is going to fight for us.
We've met a lot of people in the last number of years, and right now our roles have kind of turned from meeting those people and hearing those desperate stories of darkness and people just desiring hope so badly. Now those calls have came, from people who are vaccine injured and people that are struggling right now. They did what they could to try and get through the pandemic, and they took the shots, and now their lives are affected for the rest of their. Some people they're not here right now because of the myocarditis or the turbo cancers, and so these people are still reaching out to us. We're in direct communication with a lot of them regularly, and it's sad to say that we tried to do the best that we could to prevent some of that, but we're still standing there. We still know those stories. I still get messages from people daily telling me about how bad of a mindset they were in during those times, and so we're still here. We're still standing, and we're not going to give up.
I want to have your message and response to the people who believe that you and Chris, you are extremists, racist, and criminal.
Well, first of all, my dad always told me that other people's opinions of me are none of my business. And so first of all, I think there was a lot of obviously negative things that were said about us before we even left. So there was already a picture painted of us in the legacy media, basically that we were hoodlums and thugs, and like angry Westerners or something. I don't know. It was unbelievable. But so we didn't even have a chance before, like he was saying earlier, we started getting called racists right off the bat, misogynists. And of course that was perpetuated throughout the whole thing. We watched MPs stand up in the House of Commons and accuse the truckers of being rapists, accusing us of trying to burn an apartment building down, accusing us of stealing money from homeless shelters, defacing the Terry Fox Monument, disrespecting the War Memorial, which all of that was lies. It was all lies. But of course, the legacy media, that's what they were portraying of us. And so, people that watch that stuff, that's what they were being fed. And the truth was not getting out. And it was only because of, organizations like yours, independent media and citizen journalists that came down and a few brave journalists actually, in the legacy media at that time who weren't on our side or didn't support what we were doing, but they actually went down and talked to people down there and talked to the truckers, and that changed their minds too. So I'm just hopeful that as this goes on, I do believe the truth will always come out, and And I do believe, there's already seeing what's happened over the last 3 years has opened a lot of eyes also, as to, what we've gone through and why. So I think the truth will come out eventually. We're still not going to please everybody, and that's okay.
I've spent the last 32 years behind the wheel of a truck driving U.S., Canada, across the country, and I've always been that guy that's kind of yelled at the steering wheel or at the windshield at the state of our country and the direction that our country's been in. I've never participated in a protest. I've never been an activist. I'm not that guy, but my feelings towards dealing with COVID and trucking through COVID right from the start, when the mandates first started and the lockdown started, it was a difficult thing to do. We had no bathrooms, no restaurants. We were out here on the highway eating soup out of the bunks of the truck, standing in drive-through lineups at Tim Hortons or McDonald's or that, with passenger vehicles around you in order for you just to get a cup of coffee in the morning. And for the government to then 2 years later, that 2 weeks to flatten the curb that happened 2 years later, it wasn't ending. And it made a bunch of blue collar Canadians who felt the need to stand up to the overreach, to the tyranny, and then demand some sort of an accountability from our elected officials as to why we were going through this for so long. It was a measure of control on society. It was, I want to say, it was a test run for what's to come. And, a lot of people failed that in this country. And they continue to fail that with how, indoctrinated people are right now by listening to that legacy media source and government propaganda. And I'm thankful for people like Rebel and those independent journalists out here that are actually doing a good job in portraying the real side of the stories. As it was evident during the protest. If you watch live streams from YouTube or from the independent journalists, you've seen a completely different side of the protest compared to the way that the government was portraying it through the legacy media.
Death to Canada! Death to the United States! And death to Israel!
I don't feel that it's fair to see that some people right now are protesting for the climate, is for like Palestine or anything like that. It's to see them taking into the street, harassing, attacking, intimidating, and seeing them almost not being charged, or if they are being charged, it seems like the charge have been either dismissed. And seeing them getting away with it, being fully masked, knowing already that they are going to do bad action because you don't mask yourself if it's not for not being recognized by the police. How do you feel to see an obvious double standard?
It's been very, very discouraging to watch some of the protests that have happened in the last few years, especially in Canada here, where you've had activists that are, occupying buildings, occupying streets, shutting bridges down. There's been smoke canisters thrown into hotels. I know just in the last couple of weeks in the city of Ottawa here, where a bunch of Palestinian protesters were charged with mischief and obstruction. Last fall, the charges were all stayed recently because they wrote a letter of apology to the city, and the Crown prosecutor, who was fairly harsh towards us, was the one that signed that order off. Well, I want to say that at no time public property was destroyed in Ottawa. It was anyone who was here on the ground seen it for what it was. It was a peaceful time. It was a peaceful protest. I'm sure there was trucks. I don't know if there's ever been a protest in history where someone's life hasn't been inconvenienced by the point that the protesters were trying to make, and for that, if anyone was inconvenienced there, that we've already said that we apologize for it, but our actions didn't involve any of that, or a result of anything that we did result in that being on us. But it's been really tough to watch the last couple of years, just to see that double standard in Canada, and it's a hard pill to swallow.
It's it definitely does get frustrating sometimes. We've seen lots of cases even in the last year alone of men stabbing women and, being released right away, murders, sexual assaults that have happened. That case in Toronto with the van, I believe a van that killed a family not long ago, he was out on bail. So, I mean, it does get frustrating sometimes to see, how we've been treated over mischief. which in Canada is, a fairly minor charge. And, we have these really serious violent offenses happening, and they're just, they're let go. So I don't understand it. But that said, I mean, we're in the situation that we're in, and it is what it is. And, like we've always said, we just have to roll with the punches. And I think the most important thing is that, we just get through this and with our heads held high and as respectfully and gracefully as we can. That's what we've always tried to do. So, but does it get frustrating? Yeah, it definitely does get frustrating to see some of this sometimes. But I guess the good thing for us is that at least the end of this part is kind of in sight. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Again, I'd like to make sure everybody knows how much we support, or we appreciate the support that's out there right now for. I know it's we've got a lot of people across this entire country, if not across the world, that we're in prayers, and we appreciate that. We see that. We feel the prayers. It's been a very humbling experience, especially for me. I'd like to say that I'm probably the guy that's probably grown the most in the last number of years through this experience. It's made me a lot more aware of my surroundings and humbled me, a lot. So I'm very thankful.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what he said. Like, the support that we've had has just been absolutely incredible. I still get messages and mail from people all the time, expressing their gratitude and their support. Again, we have people that regularly show up in court to support us every day that we're there, and so it's just been an amazing experience. I think for both of us to get to know a lot of Canadians and have like the absolute pleasure of listening to their stories and hearing how their lives were changed, as a result of this in positive ways. And so we're just so grateful, and especially to you guys. Rebel News right from the start was on the ground. You got shot, for Pete's sake, and for portraying the story and giving us a platform to tell our side of the story. And I really look forward to, after the sentencing's over, and because I'm going to be able to speak a lot more freely after that, obviously, and Chris too. So I look forward to some of those interviews.
Chris Barber is being represented by Justice Center of Constitutional Freedom. Tamara, you are being represented by TDF. People can still contribute to your defense. So I invite people to either give to the GCCF for Chris Barber or to contribute to your defense at helptamara.com. So thank you everybody for watching, and you will see them again and again.